Welcome back to the Yahowah blog. I am your host, Craig Wynn. On the morning of 10/7/23, I made a number of predictions about what would happen if Israel decided that the best course of action were to send the IDF into Gaza to hold Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other Muslims, most of which were of neither organization, accountable for the savage events that day. And what I said was that if Israel makes that decision to invade Gaza and to bring the IDF to bear on Hamas and on Islamic Jihad, that with bullets and bombs, they will be counterproductive, that they will actually manufacture more Islamic terrorists than they kill. I knew this to be a fact. It is the math of religion. It doesn't matter if the religion is communism or if it is Islam. This math has been played out over and over again throughout the world. The United States faced it when we made a bad situation worse in Afghanistan. The same thing was true in Iraq when the U.S. gave Iraq to Iran. And it is true wherever battles are fought. In fact, in Vietnam, we made a bad situation worse for the same reason. If you're fighting an ideology, whether it be liberalism and the edicts of man, or religion and the edicts of false gods, you will always manufacture more fighters than you kill if your tool is bullets and bombs. So not only did I predict this on the morning of 10/7 and state it in a radio program on 10/8 in 2023. I also wrote it in the book, which was the first volume of Goddamn Religion, Snake. You'll find it there in my open letter to Israel. I was emphatic about this because I knew it to be certain and to be true. Today, there is a twice confirmed news report out of Israel. Both Channel 12 and the Jerusalem Post have picked it up. And what they are reporting is that Hamas and Islamic Jihad have in fact reconstituted in Gaza. When the IDF originally decided to take the fight to the Gazans, they estimated that there were approximately 30,000 members of Hamas there for them to rid the strip of. Well, now the IDF has confirmed that they have killed 20,000 Islamic terrorists. And yet, according to this report, there are 35,000 remaining reconstituted Hamas and Islamic jihadists. It is exactly as I said it would be. Israel could remain in Gaza forever. They could fight bravely in Gaza forever. There could be an unending supply of bullets and bombs, and it would make no difference. While I revel in the deaths of those jihadists that perpetrated such heinous crimes against Israelis, particularly their leaders, it is a cause for celebration that they are dead, And as I have pointed out, there really are minimal civilian casualties, and even those 0.03% of Gazans who could possibly claim to be civilians, most of them were co-conspirators. And so I don't feel any remorse for them having suffered the consequence of what they did on 10/7 of 23. My heart is actually with Israel, because I knew, Israel, that if this was the choice that you made, it would be counterproductive. You see, it's not only that you have manufactured as many terrorists as you have killed, and the numbers are probably much greater. It's that in the process, you've turned the world against you. You've done such a poor job of managing the flow of information out of this conflict that the Muslims protesting on college campuses and in streets around the world have managed to use progressives, the media, and academia, many politicians, to claim that you are the aggressors, that you are the murderers, that you are the ones pursuing genocide, that you are the occupiers and the colonizers, when the opposite is true. The exact opposite is true. But because you've done such a poor job of communication, because you're unwilling to state what I have said so many times, that there is no such thing as a Palestinian, there is no such place as Palestine. If you have to lie about who you are and where you are, then you don't have an argument. The last Philistine was killed 2,300 years ago. There is no genetic link, no political link of any kind to today's Muslims who are claiming to be Palestinians. And even then, they were occupiers, and they never got past Gaza. But because you would not change the narrative and speak openly and honestly about the fact that these people do not exist, that these are nothing but Muslims who want to obliterate you, you have lost in the eyes of most people. You've hurt your own reputation. And because you wouldn't do what I begged you to do, which is to wage this response against Islam and Islam's influence among those who perpetrated these heinous acts against you, because it wasn't Hamas. It wasn't Islamic Jihad. It's not Hezbollah. It's not the Iranians. It's Islam. That is the only common denominator. You were unwilling to acknowledge that Muslims, beginning with Muhammad, have sought to annihilate you for 1,400 years. That Muhammad, 1,400 years ago, led multiple raids against the Jews of Arabia and perpetrated genocide. He cut off the men's heads. He raped the Jewish women. He enslaved the Jewish children. Islam in the Quran is a declaration of war against all mankind with bonus points for killing Jews. Allah hates Jews. The Quran condemns Jews. They are doing what their Quran and their prophet ordered them to do. You can never defeat an enemy if all you're going to do is lash out against symptoms. And then the very thing that was the impetus for this scourge of 10/7 of 23, Al-Aqsa Mosque, still stands as a scar on the Temple Mount. You parade around pretending that you're wearing the Star of David and flying that flag when David is the one who arranged not only for the acquisition of that mount, but for Yahweh's home to his name to be built on top of it. And yet you allowed this scar to stand after all they have done to you. Shame on you. Israel, I love you. I will be there for you. I have risked my life to protect you, and I will continue to do so. And I will speak out on your behalf against your enemies. But you need to help. You need to change the narrative. You need to be more effective explaining what happened on 10/7 and what you're doing in response. And you need to understand that you cannot do what the politicians would have people believe. You cannot wipe out Hamas in Gaza. It is impossible. Everyone you kill will make another. The same thing is true with Hezbollah. The same thing is true with Islamic Jihad. The same thing is true in Judea and Samaria that is happening in Lebanon and Gaza. It is the reality of this religion, and you need to know it. Of course, that wasn't the only news out of Israel today. There was also terrible news out of Israel that the Israelis have no clue as to why the Houthis are trying to annihilate them. They think that they can drop bombs on Houthi headquarters and on Houthi missile production facilities without explaining who these people are. These drugged clowns took over their own country by force of arms. They perpetrated civil war against their own. They carried their AK-47s not as a threat to anyone, but to their own people. They don't care about other Muslims, just as they hate you. And so what you have with the Houthis is just another expression of Islam. They're all the same. You need to acknowledge it and deal with it. And unless you do, you're going to experience another Oscar flood. And the next one is going to be 100 times worse than the last one. It is astonishing that there are Jews, 70% of whom would tell their government to negotiate with these terrorists, with these savage Muslims, capitulating to them to get, perhaps 30 living hostages back, to open their prisons of convicted murderers, trading them for innocent Jews who have been abused all of this time, and you would reward the Islamic terrorists by capitulating to their wishes. As a result, you'll only get more. There was another story out of Israel that breaks my heart. It was finally published just how detailed the Islamic, both Hamas and Islamic Jihad, reconnaissance was of the kibbutzim in southern Israel that they attacked. They had been gathering information on the kibbutzim for 7 years. Now, the reason that this is so shocking is the kibbutzim is essentially a communist enclave. I don't have any problem with the communal living. If people want to live in a socialistic lifestyle, that is their choosing. But understand, the occupants of kibbutzim are largely progressives. They had been fooled by their ideology to believe that being kind to these Muslims, that giving these Muslims a job, inviting these Muslims into their home would create kumbaya. And that it would all be wonderful. We'd all live together. They would have a state of their own, and we would live side by side in peace and harmony. This is the delusion of progressive ideology. And so what did these progressives do? They invited these Muslims into their homes. And while they were there, they were detailing every aspect of their lives, right down to their kindergartners, so they could torture their children. And they did. And yet, even though both targets of 10/7 were comprised mostly of progressives, the kibbutzim, throughout the borderlands with the Gaza and the Rave. Now, I'm not saying that any of those people deserve to suffer. They didn't. They suffered because Islam ran amok, because Muhammad was a ruthless and savage terrorist who was willing to torture and enslave and murder anyone for money. That's why they did it. No one deserved what these Muslims did to them. But understand, their victims were largely progressives, liberals, whose mantra was, let's give them a state. Even today, 80% of liberal progressive Jews want to give these Muslim terrorists, want to reward them with a state carved out of the heart of Israel, not recognizing that Israel is indefensible and their lives won't matter for squat if they do. They're not rational enough to understand this connection. And progressives the world over, on college campuses and in the streets of our largest cities, are now campaigning with and parading around with Muslims who perpetrated these heinous acts, all while blaming Jews who were the victims. Progressives, you were the victims, and yet you learned nothing from it. So this is tragic news out of Israel, all of which I predicted and spoke about long before it occurred. Awakening you to the truth. This is Craig Wynn, and this has been the Yahowah Blog.